The Florida sun beat down on my back as I wrestled with the stubborn trunk of my patrol car, finally coaxing it shut. I was off duty, clad in faded jeans and a well-worn t-shirt, a stark contrast to the crisp, starched khakis I usually sported. It was good to be home, even if just for a few hours. The weight of the sheriff's badge felt lighter when I wasn't actively wearing it, a symbolic shedding of responsibility, however temporary. I was looking forward to a cold beer and maybe catching up on the Braves game. This quiet cul-de-sac, my little slice of suburban paradise, usually offered just that, peace. That illusion shattered as a gleaming black SUV, conspicuously oversized for the neighborhood, screeched to a halt at the end of my driveway. 4 figures emerged, an almost comical tableau of suburban authority. 3 men, all sporting identical navy blue polo shirts with some ambiguous crest embroidered on the chest, and a woman in a sharp, but undeniably cheap, business suit. They moved with a self-importance that bordered on the absurd, their faces etched with a blend of condescension and outright hostility. I straightened up, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. This wasn't a friendly visit. As they marched towards me, their polished shoes crunching on the gravel, I noticed the cheap walkie-talkies clipped to their belts and the plastic badges pinned to their chests. HOA Security, one read in bold, blocky letters. HOA. Homeowners Association. My blood ran cold. I'd heard whispers, seen the subtle escalation of their presence in the community, but I'd hoped it was just garden-variety overreach. This felt different, more aggressive. The lead man, a stocky fellow with a receding hairline and a perpetually pursed mouth, stopped directly in front of me, his eyes narrowed. The other 2 men flanked him, forming a menacing semicircle. The blonde woman remained slightly behind, her expression a carefully constructed mask of disdain. "You," the lead man barked, his voice grating and accusatory. "You look illegal. We're placing you under arrest." The audacity took my breath away. Arrest? On what grounds? For what crime? I stared at him, dumbfounded, for a moment before the simmering anger began to rise. Illegal. The word hung in the air, thick with implication, laced with the venom of prejudice. It wasn't just an accusation, it was a statement about who they perceived me to be, based solely on the color of my skin. I'd faced racism before, of course. It was an unfortunate reality for any black man in America, especially one holding a position of authority. But this felt particularly brazen, particularly targeted. I opened my mouth to speak, to demand an explanation, but he cut me off, raising a hand imperiously. "Don't try to deny it. We've been watching you. We know your type." The others nodded in agreement, their faces mirroring his self-righteous indignation. "You're a blight on this community. Disturbing the peace, lowering property values. We're taking you in." I clenched my fist, struggling to maintain control. This wasn't just about me. It was about the message they were sending, the power they were trying to wield. It was about the insidious undercurrent of bigotry that ran through this seemingly idyllic suburban landscape. I had to respond, not just as a man, but as the sheriff, as the protector of this community, even from its own darkness. "On what authority are you acting?" I asked, my voice low and calm, belying the fury raging inside. "Show me your credentials. Show me a warrant." The lead HOA enforcer scoffed, folding his arms across his chest. "We don't need a warrant. We're acting on behalf of the Homeowners Association. We have the right to maintain order in this community." He gestured to the cheap plastic badge on his chest. "This is all the authority you need to see." The other 2 men mirrored his posture, their expressions smug and defiant. The blonde woman finally stepped forward, her high heels clicking on the driveway. "We've received numerous complaints about your activities," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Disturbing the neighbors, parking your vehicle in an unauthorized manner." She glanced pointedly at my patrol car, the official markings seemingly invisible to her prejudiced eyes. I bit back a laugh. "My activities? likely consisted of mowing my lawn and occasionally having friends over for a barbecue. And the patrol car? It was parked legally, safely, and entirely unobtrusively. This was a blatant fabrication, a flimsy excuse to justify their harassment. Complaints from whom? I challenged, my voice still controlled but laced with steel. Let me see the evidence. Let me know the specific violations. They remained silent, their confidence faltering slightly under my direct gaze. The lead man cleared his throat. That's not important. What's important is that you're coming with us. He reached out, his hand hovering inches from my arm. Don't make this difficult. That was my breaking point. The touch, the implication of force, the sheer arrogance of their actions, it all coalesced into a surge of righteous anger. I stepped back sharply, avoiding his grasp. Don't touch me, I said, my voice now a low growl. I'm going to ask you one more time. On what legal basis are you detaining me? The lead man's face flushed crimson. You're resisting. You're obstructing justice. He signaled to the other two men, who moved to flank me, their eyes narrowed and their hands hovering near their sides. This was escalating quickly. They were clearly prepared to use force, fueled by their misplaced sense of authority and their deep-seated prejudice. I knew I had to act, and act decisively. I reached into my back pocket, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out my wallet. I flipped it open, revealing the gleaming gold badge of the sheriff of Oakhaven County. I held it up, letting the Florida sun glint off its surface. I am the sheriff of this county, I said, my voice ringing with authority. And you are interfering with me in my own home. Now, I suggest you explain yourselves before I place you under arrest. The effect was immediate. The smug expressions on their faces crumbled, replaced by a mixture of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror. The lead man's jaw dropped. The blonde woman gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The other two men stepped back, their hands now visibly trembling. The air crackled with tension, the silence broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant drone of traffic. The lead man stammered, "Sheriff? But we thought." He trailed off, unable to articulate his thoughts. He was clearly struggling to reconcile the image he had of me with the reality of my position. The blonde woman stepped forward again, her carefully constructed composure shattered. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice now pleading. "We were just trying to do our job, maintaining the standards of the community." I lowered my badge slightly, but kept it visible. "Your job doesn't give you the right to harass and detain people based on their appearance. Your standards seem to be rooted in prejudice and ignorance. Now I want to know who authorized this. Who told you to come here and accost me?" The silence hung heavy in the air, punctuated only by the nervous shuffling of feet. The HOA quartet looked at each other, their faces betraying a shared sense of panic. The lead man, still reeling from the revelation of my identity, finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. We were instructed by the HOA board," he stammered. They were concerned about certain residents." I raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "Concerned about certain residents? Be specific. Who on the board instructed you to target me?" They hesitated, clearly weighing their options, protecting their co-conspirators versus facing the full force of my authority. The blonde woman, apparently the most pragmatic of the group, finally broke the silence. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice resigned. "Richard Henderson. He's the president of the HOA board." Richard Henderson. The name was familiar. He was a wealthy, influential businessman, a prominent member of the community, and a vocal advocate for maintaining property values, a phrase that, in this context, felt loaded with unspoken prejudice. I'd met him once or twice at community events, and he'd always been polite, even obsequious, but I'd always sensed a certain coldness beneath the surface. "And what specific instructions did Mr. Henderson give you?" I pressed, my voice sharp and demanding. The blonde woman hesitated again, glancing nervously at her companions. The lead man nodded almost imperceptibly, giving her the go-ahead. He told us to keep an eye on you," she confessed. "He said you were a potential threat to the community. He said you were attracting the wrong kind of attention." The wrong kind of attention, another veiled reference to my race. The implication was clear. A black man in a position of authority was inherently suspicious, a threat to the established order. "Did he tell you to arrest me?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. The lead man shook his head vehemently. "No, sir. He just said to investigate. To find any violations. Anything that would justify taking action." So, they were acting on a vague directive, fueled by prejudice and a desire to please their superiors. They were willing to harass, intimidate, and even arrest me, all based on the whim of a powerful and prejudiced man. The thought made my blood boil. "I want everything," I said, my voice firm. "I want copies of all your communications with Mr. Henderson. Emails, texts, meeting notes, everything. And I want the names of everyone else on the HOA board who was aware of this operation." They nodded eagerly, desperate to cooperate. The blonde woman pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her emails. The lead man fumbled with his walkie-talkie, apparently trying to contact someone. I held up my hand, silencing him. "Leave the walkie-talkie. You're not going anywhere. I'm going to need you all to stay right here while I make a few phone calls." I turned away, pulling out my own phone. I dialed Captain Miller, my second in command. "Captain, I need you to send a unit to my house," I said, my voice clipped and professional. "I have 4 individuals here who need to be questioned regarding potential harassment and civil rights violations. And I want you to bring Mr. Richard Henderson in for questioning as well. I think we're about to uncover a rather unpleasant conspiracy." As I spoke, I could feel the weight of my badge on my chest, not just as a symbol of authority, but as a reminder of my responsibility. I was the sheriff, and I had a duty to protect everyone in this county, regardless of their race, their background, or their position in society. And I was going to make sure that Richard Henderson and his cronies were held accountable for their actions. Section. The arrival of the patrol car was a welcome sight. The flashing blue and red lights cut through the afternoon sun, instantly transforming the quiet cul-de-sac into a scene of officialdom. The HOA quartet visibly stiffened, their initial eagerness to cooperate replaced by a renewed sense of apprehension. Captain Miller, a seasoned officer with a no-nonsense attitude, stepped out of the vehicle, his eyes scanning the scene. "Sheriff," he said, nodding respectfully, "what do we have here?" I gestured to the 4 individuals standing awkwardly in my driveway. These individuals, who identify themselves as HOA security, attempted to place me under arrest without a warrant or probable cause. They claim they were acting under the instructions of Mr. Richard Henderson, the president of the Homeowners Association. I believe they were motivated by racial bias, and that their actions constitute harassment and potential civil rights violations. Captain Miller's expression hardened. He turned to the HOA quartet. "You have the right to remain silent," he recited, his voice clear and unwavering. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you." He proceeded to read them their Miranda rights, each word delivered with the weight of the law. As the officers began to take statements from the HOA individuals, I excused myself and went inside my house. I needed to change out of my civilian clothes and into my uniform. It felt important to project an image of authority and professionalism as I navigated this situation. While I was changing, I called the district attorney, Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was a sharp and dedicated prosecutor, and I knew I could count on her to take this case seriously. I explained the situation to her, detailing the events that had transpired and the potential charges that could be filed. "This is outrageous, Sheriff," she said, her voice filled with indignation. "It sounds like a clear case of racial profiling and abuse of power. I want to see all the evidence you have." If we can prove that Henderson and these individuals acted with malicious intent, we can hit them with everything we've got. I felt a surge of relief. Knowing that I had the support of the DA gave me the confidence to proceed with the investigation. I finished changing into my uniform, the weight of the badge feeling particularly significant today. I walked back outside, where the officers were still questioning the HOA quartet. They were clearly cooperating, their initial bravado completely gone. Captain Miller approached me, his expression grim. "Sheriff, we've secured their statements. They're all singing the same tune. Henderson gave them vague instructions to keep an eye on you and to find any violations they could use to justify taking action. They admit that they were motivated by a desire to please Henderson and to maintain the standards of the community." "And what about Henderson?" I asked. "Have they brought him in?" "Yes, sir," Captain Miller replied. "He's waiting for you at the station. He's denying everything, of course. Claims he never instructed them to target you specifically. Says he was just concerned about maintaining order in the community." I nodded grimly. I knew that Henderson wouldn't admit anything easily. But I also knew that we had enough evidence to make his life very difficult. "Let's go," I said. "It's time to have a conversation with Mr. Richard Henderson." The Oak Haven County Sheriff's Department interrogation room was a study in sterile functionality. Gray walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, and a one-way mirror that offered a silent audience. Richard Henderson sat stiffly in the chair, his expensive suit slightly rumpled, his face pale and drawn. He exuded an air of entitled indignation, as if he were the one being wronged. I sat across from him, my uniform crisp and imposing, my gaze unwavering. Captain Miller stood silently behind me, a silent reminder of the power of the law. "Mr. Henderson," I began, my voice calm but firm. "Thank you for coming in. We have a few questions for you regarding the events that transpired at my home earlier this afternoon." Henderson cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. "Sheriff, I assure you, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I have the utmost respect for law enforcement. I would never do anything to obstruct justice." "That's good to hear, Mr. Henderson," I replied. "Because we have statements from 4 individuals who claim they were acting under your instructions when they attempted to detain me at my home. They claim you told them to keep an eye on me and to find any violations that would justify taking action. Do you deny these allegations?" Henderson hesitated, his eyes darting nervously around the room. I may have mentioned that I was concerned about certain individuals in the community," he stammered. "But I never instructed them to target you specifically. I simply asked them to be vigilant and to ensure that everyone was adhering to the HOA rules and regulations." "So, you're saying it was just a coincidence that they targeted the only black man in the neighborhood who also happens to be the sheriff of this county?" I asked, my voice laced with skepticism. Henderson's face flushed. "That's not what I meant at all," he protested. "I'm not a racist, Sheriff. I have friends of all races. I just want to maintain the standards of this community. I want to protect property values." "And what standards are those, Mr. Henderson?" I pressed. "And whose property values are you trying to protect? Because it seems to me that your actions were designed to intimidate and harass me, simply because of the color of my skin." Henderson remained silent, his eyes downcast. I knew I was getting to him. He was a man who was used to getting his own way, a man who was accustomed to being in control. But now, he was facing the consequences of his actions, and he didn't like it one bit. "Mr. Henderson," I said, leaning forward, "I'm going to give you one more chance to tell me the truth. Did you instruct these individuals to target me because of my race?" He hesitated again, his face contorted with internal conflict. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Okay, fine," he said, his voice barely audible. Maybe there was some prejudice involved. But it wasn't just about race. It was about image. I was worried about what the other residents would think. I was worried about property values. So, you admit it? I asked, my voice triumphant. You admit that you targeted me because of my race, and because you were worried about what the other residents would think? Henderson nodded slowly, his face etched with shame. Yes, he confessed. I admit it. A wave of satisfaction washed over me. I had him. He had admitted his guilt. Now, it was time to hold him accountable. With Henderson's confession secured, the legal process moved swiftly. The district attorney, true to her word, pursued the case aggressively. Henderson and the 4 HOA security members were charged with a litany of offenses, including harassment, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. The trial was a media frenzy. National news outlets descended upon Oak Haven County, eager to cover the story of the black sheriff who had been targeted by a racist HOA. The community was divided. Some rallied around me, expressing their support and outrage at Henderson's actions. Others defended Henderson, claiming that he was just trying to protect the community and that I was overreacting. The evidence presented at trial was damning. The HOA quartet testified against Henderson, detailing his instructions and his prejudiced remarks. Emails and text messages were presented, revealing his deep-seated biases and his desire to maintain the standards of the community. The jury deliberated for days, ultimately finding Henderson guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to a significant prison term and ordered to pay a hefty fine. The HOA security members received lighter sentences in exchange for their cooperation with the prosecution. The aftermath of the trial was a period of intense reflection and reckoning for Oak Haven County. The community had been forced to confront its own deep-seated prejudices and inequalities. There were town hall meetings, community forums, and open discussions about race, privilege, and justice. I used my position as sheriff to promote dialogue, understanding, and reconciliation. I established a community outreach program designed to bridge the gap between law enforcement and minority communities. I worked with local schools to implement anti-bias training and to promote diversity and inclusion. It was a long and difficult process, but slowly, gradually, Oak Haven County began to heal. The scars of the past would never completely disappear, but the community was committed to building a more just and equitable future. As for me, the experience had a profound impact on my life. It reinforced my commitment to fighting for justice and equality. It reminded me that even in the most seemingly idyllic communities, prejudice can lurk beneath the surface. And it strengthened my resolve to use my position as sheriff to protect and serve all members of the community, regardless of their race, their background, or their belief. 1 year after the trial, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. It was the blonde woman from the HOA, the one who had initially been so dismissive and condescending. She looked contrite and humbled. "Sheriff," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I just wanted to apologize. For what I did. For what I said. I was wrong. I was prejudiced. And I'm truly sorry." I looked at her for a long moment, searching her eyes for sincerity. I saw genuine remorse. I nodded slowly. "I appreciate that," I said. "It takes courage to admit you were wrong." "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she continued. "And I've realized that I need to do something to make amends. I've started volunteering at a local community center, working with underprivileged kids. I'm also taking a course on diversity and inclusion. I want to learn more. I want to be a better person." I smiled slightly. "That's good to hear," I said. "The first step towards healing is acknowledging the problem. The next step is taking action to fix it." As she turned to leave, I stopped her. "One more thing," I said. "You and the others made a mistake. You judged me based on my appearance. You assumed I was someone I wasn't. But you know what? You also underestimated me. You underestimated my strength, my resilience, and my commitment to justice. And that's something I hope you'll never do again." She nodded again, her eyes filled with tears. "I won't," she said. "I promise." And as she walked away, I knew that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope for redemption, and that even the most entrenched prejudices can be overcome with courage, honesty, and a commitment to justice. The fight for equality is a long and arduous one, but it's a fight worth fighting. And I, as the sheriff of Oak Haven County, was determined to keep fighting the good fight every single day.